I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Broadcasting under the night sky from the edge of an undisclosed jungle on the Gulf of Mexico, I'm Christopher Garetano, your voice in the night. For the next hour, allow me to be your guide into the bizarre unknown, the fantastic macabre, and together we'll journey to that borderland between fiction and reality, a place beyond all rational explanation. We are now off to the witch. The human mind searches for cause and effect always, and we all prefer the weird and thrilling to the dull and commonplace as an answer. That's a line from the famous 1955 novel of horror and science fiction by author Jack Finney, originally titled The Body Snatchers and later adapted as several motion picture versions, including Philip Kaufman's powerfully bizarre remake of Don Siegel's 1956 classic monster movie of the same name. Better known as The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it's the story of a shape-shifting alien organism that drifts through the vast cosmos, eventually landing on planet Earth, a type of coldly intelligent, extraterrestrial vegetation with the ability to replicate and dispose of the human race. The hero of each adaptation slowly begins to notice something very weird about their friends, family, colleagues, and loved ones, until it's revealed that all of the above were murdered in their sleep, grotesquely absorbed, replicated, and replaced by the tentacles of an emotionless alien imposter. It's just science fiction, of course. The metaphor of fear that we could figuratively fall asleep and turn a blind eye to a tyrannical mind control. Perhaps the most celebrated example is the 1988 science fiction classic, They Live, by the mighty John Carpenter. It tells the story of a struggling freelance construction worker named John Nada, played by the late Roddy Piper, who optimistically believes in hope and the American dream. But then he stumbles upon a pair of special sunglasses that allows him to see a subliminal world designed by a combination of oppressive aliens and human greed. What if I were to tell you that there are those around the world who strongly believe that the recurring story in these movies are not metaphor, but literal truth? Later tonight, we'll talk to one of them. Her name is Jenny Constantine, and she has a shocking tale to tell us. So sit tight. You don't want to miss this. I'll be back after this commercial break.
In 1968, George Romero reflected back at the world with his horror classic, Night of the Living Dead. Throughout 4 decades, from the rising dawn and on throughout land, he continued to inspire our nightmares. Now, 3 years after his death, George A. Romero returns from the grave with his final masterpiece, The Living Dead, a mammoth novel and his ultimate zombie epic. From Tor Books and co-authored by Daniel Kraus comes George A. Romero's The Living Dead. Find it wherever books are sold.
What do these things want, and why are they here?
They're running the whole show.
I don't know what they are or where they came from, but we gotta stop them.
Blind on us for the truth.
Look, I've got one that can see.
Look at them, they're everywhere.
From John Carpenter. They Live. Rated R. Starts Friday, November 4th at theaters everywhere.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. Tonight's guest has an extraordinary tale to share with us, and I ask you, as I have, to please keep an open mind throughout her explanations and the details of her story. At the very least, it's certainly interesting, but this goes further than the fictional tales of Jack Finney and John Carpenter. To me, Jenny Constantine is the closest to one of the characters in our favorite movies come to life. Much like the John Nada character in They Live, Jenny is a committed activist to her cause, but a real person that's not seeking fame, as she understands there are more risks for her and her family than potential rewards. She's a mother who loves her children and understands the dangers of publicly telling a tale like this. She's very candid about some of her worst moments, but she's clearly sane and lucid and aware of what she's about to tell you. So here's my interview with Jenny Constantine.
Back then for me started on a military base in Panama City, 1989. Born to a diplomat father and a regular, she's a Celtic Latina mother, Irish and Honduran. Just a few weeks, I believe it was between 9 days and 2 weeks, my mother, my brother, and myself were evacuated from the area due to heavy military activity, U.S. military activity. Some people would recognize it, some people won't, but it's called Operation Just Cause that took place in 1989. So even the circumstances and climate surrounding my very entry into this world, there was a very heavy influence of military, government, just a lot of excitement, lots of action, right? So it all started very quickly for me. I was born into an intelligence family. My father works for various letter agencies, including Homeland Security and Central Intelligence Agency. I've made no secret about any of this since I first came out publicly as Jenny, as myself, as a seer, as a reader. I never made any secrets of my origins because I really never wanted it to be used, weaponized against me in any way because of what we know about the intelligence agencies.
Did you know when you were a little girl that your life was different from most people, especially being around all of these, in a lot of ways, secret operations?
I had no idea. I thought that everybody I had absolutely no idea that any circumstances in my life were unusual or out of the ordinary, and that's in part due to the fact that my the other kids that I grew up with, their families were also involved in their country's respective governments and militaries. So our pool was quite while it was far-reaching, meaning international, it was very small, and we were quite exclusive. The schools that I went to, they're all kind of connected, and I guess we'll get into that later. But I really wish that I could say that there was a time that I didn't know something was up, because then maybe I would have enjoyed some semblance of ignorance and thus bliss. But while I understood my environment to be normal in the sense that I thought everybody else had that environment, I also had a deep sense of, I want to use the word dis-ease, not disease, but dis-ease. And I was always the odd kid out.
Sure. Is there a moment way back then that really stands out for you that it showed you that moment, probably in regard to what your dad was doing or anything that you witnessed that really showed you there was something very different than what was being portrayed to us?
Oh God, there have been many moments, and the interesting part of it to me is that I wasn't able to contextualize those moments until I got older and gained perspective and experience that comes with age. I didn't know that was meaningful. I didn't know the implications of those moments that we're talking about. But they did happen, and as I sit here right now, I can go back and tell you exactly what those moments were. And it's tough. It's tough to talk about this stuff because I'm fine with it, but people become uncomfortable because they believe that these things don't happen, and that the world that they see at face value right here on the surface, that's the end all be all of it. And that's simply not true.
Specifically, what is it, that you can remember that later you reflected and realized this was something profound in your early days?
Sure. So I'll start with this one experience I had. Very tender memory, very early memory. I couldn't have been older than 3 or 4, and I recall being in the back seat of a vehicle going through a windy, hilly road, and we come to this beautiful property in the middle of what looks like there's hills there, and they're not mountains, they're more like hills, but gorgeous. And it is a huge mansion, gorgeous mansion. When I was up until the age of 3, we lived in Kingston, Jamaica. That's where my father worked. And I don't actually know exactly what his occupation was, which agency he was working for at the time, but that would have been between 1989 and 1992. Because by the time I remember vividly, 1993 was in Fairfax County, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. So we were in Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica, and this is where some of my earliest memories, where things were really coming across as being strange. It started way, right in the beginning. But anyways, there's this massive party, so lavish, so much money. I mean, the tables, the tablecloths, the chairs, everything. I remember vivid detail. I remember the clothing. I remember the jewelry. It was so beautiful. And I was walking alone. For some reason, I was just walking along this property by myself. And I come up to, and I seriously, again, 3 years old. I come up to what looks like a ditch, but it was very deliberately dug, and a very steep and sudden drop off from on the property. It was behind this mansion and a little bit off to the side. And I remember coming up to this ditch, and it was just this immediate drop off. I looked down, and of course, my baby brain couldn't process any of it. These are images that are burned into my mind. And so now I can make sense of it. But I look down, and about 6 to 9 feet below the top of this ditch, there's a ledge. And I look over and I see children, older than me. They were older than me. They looked like they may have been between the ages of 5 and 10. And they were emaciated to the point of, they were so weak they couldn't even look up at me. But they were chained, and they were just kind of grabbing onto this ledge, or they were sitting on the ledge, but they were trying not to fall off because it went very deep. And I had no idea what I was looking at as a child. And that's kind of where the image ends. I could just speculate that an adult came and got me, pulled me away, whatever. But that's where it ended for me. And I'll never forget the looks on their faces. I said, now looking back, I'm like, what was going on? What was this about? And my understanding of it now, and although I can't prove this because there's no way, um, my understanding is that this party, the owner of this property, the point of this whole shindig had something to do with the ritualistic abuse of these children. There was no good reason why there were chained up, enslaved, emaciated. By the way, they were brown children. They were not white kids, they were brown. So, because the white kids at the party were like me. They were playing. They were, being fed. The adults were, bouncing us around on their knees like everything was fine. And yet these brown children were in a ditch, chained up and emaciated. So,
Did you ever ask your father or any other adult what exactly that was?
if I had known then what I know now, I would have protested at age 3 and been like, you're all crazy. This is so bad. You're all going to be in big trouble. Do you know what I mean? But I, of course, at around age 24, 23, 24 was when I was so inundated with the implications of my memories that otherwise didn't make sense. And he tells me that, and so I took this memory, the description of this memory, and I came to him with it.
You came to your father.
I came to my father with this memory, including other memories, more distressing memories. And I will never ever forget, we're in his home, beautiful home. And at that point in my life, I had already moved out and began my own young family. So our connection was not and it was never very strong. But I'll never forget this man leaning over his chair in front of the kitchen table and looking down and then looking at me and saying, Jenny, I know this is very interesting. He used the word interesting. I know it's very interesting, but you really got to drop it. And at that point, I was kind of expecting something similar, like, let it go. And you're being emotional, postpartum, whatever. I was a young mother in a toxic relationship and I was under a lot of stress. So I halfway expected him to be like, get it together, kid, find a hobby and leave the fantasies alone. But then he took it a step further. And this was maybe the biggest mistake or Freudian slip or what have you. I'm not exactly sure. But he felt the need to take it a step further and say, the memories that you have are not memories of this lifetime. They are memories of an alternate timeline. And you have to understand, I had never heard anything like that from my dad before, ever. As far as parallel timelines, alternate lifetimes, that kind of talk had not been brought up until that moment in time.
During your teenage years, did you just kind of put it in the back of your mind and try and forget it?
So my teenage years were the most tumultuous years of my life. I've always had a big mouth, Chris. Like, I've always had a desire to be heard, almost to a fault. But when I was a child, I was so open and so vocal about my dreams, my visions, my experiences, that I made the near fatal mistake of telling my parents. and now, if I could have just sat that little girl down and said, shh, don't say anything until you're 18. Don't trust these people. And what I did was I entrusted these people with my physical, emotional, and mental health. And by age 13, I was essentially handed over to what I call the white coats, And so between the ages of 13 to 17, I was guinea pig with almost every combination of pharmaceutical drugs that at the time were new to the market. And I spent sizable portion of that period in and out of institutions, including hospitals and programs, like namely, they're called programs for difficult children. And so all of this stemming from my who I was as a child, her inability to keep her mouth shut about her experiences. And so I told my family, and they saw this as a very serious problem.
You had experienced a lot by the time you were a young teen, and so you were very vocal about it. And at that point, was there a denial on the part of your fathers, your parents, and then they felt it was a detriment to your mental health, or at least portrayed it that way? Is that what happened?
Yes, yes. And I would really like to take into consideration here who my parents are, and in their defense, they are both under very serious programming of their own, either, given to them or bestowed upon them by external forces. I mean, when you work for the government and you're groomed for government work, as my father was from the time he was born, they really are operating on a completely different wavelength than I was. And I was born into this family. So these lines were incredibly incongruent with one another. And so they saw my abilities as a real wrench, a monkey wrench in their machine. And so they, being the people that they are, and having their beliefs, they handed me over to the American Association of Psychologists or whatever, and they nearly destroyed my brain.
Were you institutionalized at all, or they just kind of put you in programs to kind of heal your anxieties?
I was institutionalized. I spent time collectively, probably 7 to 9 months collectively, on the other side of a double-sided mirror, where I was constantly observed during daylight hours behind that, on the other side of that mirror, and then my sleep was monitored.
At this point, right, in the conversation, what would you say to a listener who's like, well, wherever we go next, of course, this might be just another delusion. And what we're about to get into is some elaborate stuff that they might only know in the movies. Obviously, a lot of people believe in the things we're talking about, and very sane, sound-minded people like yourself, but what would you say to somebody right now who's about to disregard because of your history? Like, to clarify with them.
For anybody that would disregard anything that I would have to say based off of my troubled past, my troubled teen years, I would say a lot of us have been, have experienced troubled pasts. There's something to be said for a soul that comes in and recognizes, might not be able to articulate it, but recognizes that there is trouble here. And so they'll manifest for themselves various conflicts and all kinds of complications, because they don't know how to articulate, even within themselves, what's wrong or what the problem is. And it's kind of like the fundamental crack in the wound of the collective human psyche. And then people like myself that come here knowing full well that there is a problem, we do tend to live and experience lives that are tumultuous, extreme.
Okay, what we're about to get into is pretty elaborate. And the way I set this up is I was a kid growing up, just like most of us, with science fiction and horror films, right? And so in those films, there's a series of, and even literature. Way back, there was a book written by Jack Finney called Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It was meant to be metaphor at what was happening back then, in the McCarthy era, and the whole argument about communism and the fear of that, and all of that was put into a really weird sci-fi film. Fast forward later on, you have science fiction films like V. When I was a little kid, V came out. It was about reptilian aliens in human skin and disguise. And then there was John Carpenter's They Live. And so those movies, now there are people saying, in so many words, including yourself, that they believe it's not just metaphor, that it's literal truth, that there really are beings in human skin manipulating us, and everything that's in front of us, no matter what it is, whether it be the good or bad guys, okay, like, proverbial good or bad guys, they're all in on it. It's all one big play. Do your beliefs support that in short? Because that's the short version of it, of course.
Yes. Yes.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
They come from a dying world. They drift through the universe, pushed on by the solar winds. They adapt, and they survive. The function of all life is survival. Sleep, sleep, sleep. From deep space, sleep. The seed is planted. Sleep, sleep. Terror grows.
Matthew! Matthew! Matthew!
Like the others.
Elizabeth, wake up! Get you when you sleep. Sit up!
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
It's got no detail, no character. It's unformed.
All of a sudden, they're growing like parasites. Is it contagious? People are being duplicated.
How do you know my name? I didn't tell you my name.
Can't find anything in here that looks like a body.
My side's nosebleed.
It looked right at me.
You're looking at it as if it was human. It was not human.
Now, the classic fear begins to grow.
We're being cornered.
In a modern masterpiece of science fiction.
They're barricading the street.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Get down!
Starring Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams, Leonard Nimoy. Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
And this is for all the people who have never heard of this before, right? Because many of us who do know will follow along as well. So you're a human being and you're living in this world and you feel like something just isn't right, okay? And you've seen all of these movies or you're aware of them. And now someone was to explain to you What really is happening? If you could take me to the very beginning of that and delicately explain to me, what is, from your perspective at least, what do you believe is really truly happening? And that does include the perception that there is an alien force manipulating humans here on this earth. How would you explain it to not an infant, but somebody who's kind of feels like there's something wrong, but they're not aware of any of this?
There shouldn't be a layman's terms with this, but for the sake of getting people up to speed quickly, we have layman's terms. Okay, so my understanding of this is that several malevolent, or I shouldn't say, okay, so several races of interdimensional beings, they're people, okay? They are people. So I think it would serve folks listening to start to look at ETs as people, because although they do not look like you and I in their final forms, if you will, they're people in the sense that a single race can have the same spectrum of good and bad, or light and dark beings within one population. So they are people in the sense that some are benevolent and some are malevolent. So I adhere to the idea that even within the quote unquote reptilian races, there are benevolent ones that see human beings as similar to the way that we see our dogs, or a dog, a breed of dogs that somebody takes very seriously, and they breed the best with the best and create strong lines, and they take a lot of pride in like their animal husbandry. There are ETs that look at us, reptilians namely, that look at us that way.
When you refer to reptilians, what does that mean?
So my understanding of reptilians, and I believe the reason they're called reptilians has to do with their original living conditions, and had to do with it actually has to do with the blood and the formation of their blood. They're different from us. When I say interdimensional, they have the ability to phase up and phase down in density at will. They're only actually able to do this because of their advanced understanding of the grid system here on planet Earth, in this realm. Now, as far as where the reptilians come from, I think it's fair at this point to say that a reptilian can be considered, it's like a certain species, okay? And there are different kinds of reptilians. It's kind of like we will now categorize all reptilians as having this set of traits over here, and then everybody else has this set of traits over here. So it's a species thing.
In the early 1980s, there was a mini-series called Visitors, and it literally was a group of intelligent humanoid-type beings that landed on Earth, kind of like a day the Earth stood still situation, and offered friendship at first. But underneath their skin, they were a race of intelligent reptilian humanoids. And so when someone remembers that show or other incarnations of it, and then they hear this, they're like, no, this is from a movie. What would you tell them at that point?
Well, I would tell them that for the most part, what a movie is, besides production, besides the technical aspect of what a movie is, when a creator or a story writer, a human being, okay, we're talking about humans now, comes up with a storyline, they are arguably, now this is my understanding, they are actually in a way recycling stories that have existed within the collective human psyche for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, if not longer. So I should say thousands and thousands of generations, going all the way back to our earliest tribes. And so what the point I'm trying to make here is that a lot of these stories that we hear, the movies that we see, and people are like, this is like a movie. It's because the creators of these movies are taking from the human collective our stories from us, because mental energy, astral energy, it is a palpable, tangible, measurable energy that you and I might not know how to use, but the controllers do. The people at the top, tippy top of Hollywood and those big time production studios, they know how to siphon from the human collective these stories of our pasts. Okay, and that's what they're doing. So that's why these movies seem so real, is because they are deriving these storylines from collective human memory, of which they have access to, and they have various means through which to access this information. So, I mean, it's kind of like the ultimate in gaslighting, because we'll go to a movie. I can't even watch like the Marvel movies or the Avengers. It makes me so emotional because I see it as a bastardization of, you know, the original stories of my friends and my family. Do you know what I mean? It's not, it feels like they're trying to sell us back our own story, but with a McDonald's brand stamped on it. And to me, it feels like such an abomination, an insult, a desecration to our original blueprint, our original story.
I'm following what you're saying. For someone who is asleep, I think, is it because, and I'm going to also have another very important question to ask you about this, but is it because that this stuff is so complicated and most people are so deep in this dream? The way that these beings got away with this, is it because it's so complicated to figure out? Is it because it's so far removed from our general reality that people are just don't want to even begin to wrap their heads around it?
It is like a self-defense mechanism of the human being to cycle back to our origin point. So this information, who we are and where we come from, bubbles up within us naturally. This is why we are naturally drawn to the tides of the ocean. We are naturally drawn to the night sky and the depths of the wilderness, the mystery. If without the influence of things like pharmaceuticals, vaccinations, crappy food, television, EMFs, Wi-Fi, propaganda, I think it should be a bold testament to the resilience and sense of duty and wired inside the human being, that it requires of these controlling factions a telepathic onslaught and physical, spiritual, emotional onslaught of control mechanisms in order to suppress this information from bubbling up inside the collective human psyche naturally. Look at the effort, the money, the campaigns that they have to pour in an almost constant, never-ending loop to keep this natural spirit at bay. And so if we were even to go 1 year, just 1 year of life in the Western world without all of these things that prop us up, we think they prop us up, but they really hold us down, then people will naturally be communicated with through their dreams, through their bodies, through each other, through the sky, through the wind, through the animals. All of our origins would come howling back to us through means that people don't really feel comfortable with right now, because societally we are kind of, I'm going to use the word retarded, and I don't mean anything insulting about that, but literally we have been slowed all the way down. And if those controlling mechanisms, everything from the vaccinations to the meds to the porn to the food to the chemtrails, if all of that were to be scaled back, then the human spirit would do what it has done since creation, since we started incarnating here, since we were made. Okay. And so like I said, I feel it's such a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the human collective's desire to know itself and its origins and to propel itself forward. They have to try so hard to keep us down. And we only need like a 6 month to 12 month window to have the opportunity to come back to ourselves. That's my thoughts on that.
In the last, let's say, and we can even give it a decade, it's been increasingly more suspicious that there's something going on. Now, some might say, well, there are just some corrupt traitors within our government that are colluding with other countries like China or wherever, and that are causing a big problem, and that's just simply just a takeover that's been happening since the dawn of society. On another hand, there are a lot of people, obviously not just yourself, that are really saying, no, this is an interdimensional or alien force. And so my questions are, what are they, and why are they here, and when did they first arrive?
As far as when, I don't feel comfortable answering the when part, but I do feel like I have really grasped the how, okay? The how they managed to do this, and how their technique has sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's been degenerated. And what we are living through right now is the inevitable degeneration of their technique and of their grid. The construct that has been set up in our realm by what we will for now call the reptilians, but that I will say that it's not exclusive to the reptilians. They get such a bad rep here, and I'm telling you, I think that there's a level of control to that too, because there are others. But my understanding of how their technique works, and it's very upsetting, but I'm just going to get into it. This is important. It's, in my opinion, the only thing that anybody should really be concerned with, because all of our problems, for the most part, are rooted in this foundational rot of society, that it stems from their grid, their technique. And that technique is through the collection and I don't want to say buying and selling, because I feel that simplifies the transaction that goes into the movement of human commodities. So it's not so much the buying and selling as much as it is the currency, okay, the root system through which human beings are shuffled through, okay? What the malevolent extraterrestrial cabal have been able to do here is quite literally power what we can call the matrix infrastructure, which interfaces with the lens of the eye. Now, the lens of the eye, the average human being walking around right now has been tampered with. We've all been tampered with. Genetically, we've been tampered with. Our DNA at one point was something far greater. It was a much longer strand. We are now at a level where what we see with the human eye, with the lens of the eye, is but a fraction of what is actually there. So this is why we see a lot of reference to the pyramid and the light spectrum. NBC News's logo with the lights, the rainbow lights. This is a mockery, because the fact that the human lens can currently only detect the rainbow, there is a million things beyond that, above that, beyond that. So what we are detecting, what we're perceiving with the human lens, is their matrix construct. They've been able to power that construct through the siphoning, okay, and this is where things get kind of, well, very gross, but through the siphoning of human pain, suffering, torture, and discord. What we see with our eyes, we only see it because that's what they want us to see. And so when people talk about something in the corner of your eye, a spirit, these elemental beings that pop in and out, these interdimensional creatures of the forest that pop in and out, there was a time in this realm where the veils that separated our realm, our world, and theirs were thin to non-existent. But with the introduction of this matrix infrastructure, they made it so that the runoff, the psychic runoff from these people that they traffic, of which the numbers, the souls, it's in the trillions. Okay, it's an immense amount of power, immense amount of fuel. It's glitching out now, and this is why within the last year, if you pay attention, people's paranormal experiences they've experienced a surge in communications from the other side. Sightings have increased. Everything has just reached this fever pitch because the matrix infrastructure, otherwise known as the veil, has been thinning out because their fuel source, their battery, is dying. And their battery is the men, women, and children that they use for food and fuel.
There's no easy way to explain this, and I think the most simplistic examples are in the movies. Did you ever see a motion picture that came out in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, called John Carpenter's They Live?
Would you believe I've never seen They Live?
It's so profound that it's actually more popular now than ever. And the star of the movie was ex-wrestler Roddy Piper. He really pushed in the days before he died that They Live is a documentary. He believed that it was true. I think John Carpenter, who wrote it, kind of remains silent and says he was commenting on the Reagan era and the Bush era. But it is so close to what you're saying. And essentially, it's this alien race that lives amongst us that are portrayed as the rich and elite, living in human skin. And a regular working man stumbles upon a group, a renegade group of people, let's say like ourselves, right, that discovered this issue and created glasses that can break the signal. So when they put the glasses on, you're seeing a whole nother veil here. And everything you're saying, like the porn, the advertisements, all of that, you can see what it really says with the glasses. And there are just major statements like obey, marry, reproduce, stay asleep, no imagination, stuff like that. And it's a combination of these aliens and the rich elite politicians, stuff like that. How close is that basic example to the reality of what you're trying to explain?
Sure. So, I mean, although I might be one of 5 people in our field that hasn't seen it, I've seen so many cultural references and crossovers, to relate to that movie, that I feel like I know exactly what it's about, and I've seen a great many artistic, pop-ups. It's a cult classic. People love it. Okay. So I am familiar. I just haven't sat through it. But yeah. And so it's funny because you just connected a dot for me that I hadn't managed to put together, and that is that the key was the glasses. Okay, the key was the adjustment pertaining to the lens of the eye. Okay, and I feel that this is so significant and probably not something that has been. I mean, I could be wrong, but I personally haven't delved too deeply into it, and I feel motivated to do it. But there is something about the eyes that they have us through some means locked into this fake echo. It's like a fake echo of the world behind the world.
Do you feel that 2020 is a huge part of, I want to say, maybe the beginning of this new revelation for a lot of people? Do you feel like this year was, like, what is this year? Because a lot of people can't figure it out. Some of them, of course, are just going along with anything anybody tells them. But a lot of us who are kind of in this neutrality feel, yeah, there really is something off, like really off. It's not just this pandemic. It's not just this political back and forth, constant hijacking of our lives. There is really something else going on. What would you say to those people who might not be 100% on board with opening their minds to an interdimensional race or aliens, but what would you say to them to pay attention to and how to prepare for maybe what's coming next?
I would paint 2020 as this opportunity, this once in a lifetime opportunity to jump through this portal completely free and clear of any and all rules that you currently held sacred, and jump full speed ahead, full risk, no bungee cords, no support, no nothing. Just jump, because this may be our only chance. I feel this is our last chance for the next 25,000 years. So we're prepared to do it. And you're not alone. And when I say make that jump, I mean lean into your inner knowing and try to come to terms with the fact that 99% of what you were told is a complete and utter lie.
Can I ask you a question? So are there, like in these stories, elites that are well aware of what's going on and have completely sold themselves out? Elite humans.
Oh, absolutely. There's elite humans that have sold themselves out. And then on the other side of that coin, there are bloodlines. There are what we would call hybrid humans that were poised and groomed to be the worst of the worst and hold the crown and the position for the high priest or priestess of this shadow cult or that one.
So ultimately, it's like, I think if we were to put it in a log line, and obviously this will be much longer than that, but the point is, if we were to summarize this, what we have are an unknown amount of years, at least going back, a millennia, maybe more, since the dawn of civilization. There's an ever-growing presence that at some point in our timeline, and they're interdimensional and they're alien, that took a hold of our consciousness, manipulated it, and made us feel like there's something that's happening that there isn't. Completely controlled us with devices and vices, and one of their main components and one of the things that they are fueled by is literally, is it murdering children, or is it taking children?
I'll tell you exactly what it is. I'll tell you exactly what it is. So whoever is dominant, whoever has dominance over the collectively agreed upon field of existence in this realm, they are the quote unquote winners. They are the dominators of this realm if they can dominate the field. Okay. Now the field is made up of different. It has different combinations of frequencies, okay, which is why they have been able to dominate it, because they know so much more about, frequency and tone and vibration than we do. They've held that information away from us, but they have to reinforce their synthetic grid, their malevolent field, if you will, by subjugating and suppressing the source field, the infinite grid with which we are all fundamentally tethered to. So when they take a child, and this is very difficult, but I'm so past the, at this point, I'm just so filled with like a sense of duty and obligation that I just blurt this stuff out and I let people process it for themselves. But say you take a child, let's use a Native American child, and I use that example deliberately because the indigenous peoples are so connected to the earth. They, for many different reasons, but they will take an indigenous child, a native child, and they will push that child through pain and torture to such a place, to such a space inside that child's psyche, inside that child's spirit, that they can quite literally rip through space-time fabric and begin to do their work, their dirty work. And they do this on a mass level, they do this on a mass scale. But when they take a child, because that child is so close to source, because they are an organic human being, because they are rooted in the earth through their ancestry, and they are just potent little fractals of source energy, our enemies see this, the capture and the torture and destruction of this child. They see it as an attack on God itself. And so this is what gives them their power. This is why the worse the torture, the worse the pain, the more depraved and sick and demented the action against the child, the more power they are given by their malevolent field. It gives their malevolent field, it's like a loop. It's like a data loop. So it's an attack on God when they attack children. And so that's how that works. And it's absolutely terrifying, but it's also the most crucial knowledge that we need to come to and fast.
And so, and again, and I understand there are many ways of getting to this estimation. It's not so black and white. It's not just like, oh, I have a photo of one of these reptilians, so this is my evidence. But if someone were to say to you, well, I feel like there's something wrong here, and I certainly feel like human beings are participating in this. Is there any evidence at all to support these beings, the existence of these beings? Is there, outside of it just being very corrupt, very messed up human beings, what is the evidence to support that they are alien in origin and that they are or interdimensional?
We have to leave room for the very real possibility that we don't completely understand the nature of the dimensions and how we phase up and how we phase down. But an example that I'll use, and it's funny because this is actually a scene in The Matrix. They make reference to this, and I thought it was just fabulous. The Oracle discusses these interdimensional beings in such a context where she refers to them as programs. If the Earth realm is hardware, these critters, these creatures, she used the examples of werewolves, vampires, ghosts, cryptozoology, those kinds of creatures. When a human being experiences or encounters these interdimensional beings, they're messing around with things they're not supposed to mess around with. But what she really means by that is the way the grid is currently set up. The veil is constructed to keep humans away from the knowledge of our interdimensional nature. So the evidence for ETs, interdimensionals, all of that stuff, I mean, if you were to talk to anybody, everybody that I have ever spoken to has had some semblance of paranormal activity. It is common. It is every day. It is all day long. Everything from spirits, manifesting themselves into apparitions, to things like Bigfoot and UFOs that are not military. Genuine ET, crafts. There's evidence everywhere. I just think that we have such a rigid, collectively agreed upon notion of things that we think that those don't count as evidence. I look forward to a day when people's experiences and their genuine testimony is considered evidence. And we can start taking those things into consideration. It's just that the way that the system's set up is we dismiss things. We say, oh, she's crazy. Oh, he's crazy. That's not fair. That's dismissive, and it's ignorant, and it keeps us stuck.
And that is why I'm doing this show, because you refer back to Jack Finney, who was the writer who wrote Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And again, if you watch that movie now, you're like, wow, this is how everyone's behaving. Like if you don't conform to this group and say the exact same thing all of them are saying, they will point you out and scream. It's like, it's crazy. So I ask this to every guest. If you were to take one thing from this life, and you can portray this in however way you like, what would you take with you when you leave this existence?
That's a very interesting question. What would I take with me? The first thing that jumps out to me is I'm going to get emotional. I'm going to try not to. My unbridled, unknowable, it's such an immense force that I feel has kept me safe. It has guided me this whole time, and that is my empathy. My empathy, my love, mostly for children, but it is this deep, I call it the old magic. I feel it's the oldest magic, that I believe it to be a kind of residual juice, if you will, that courses through the systems of organic humans. And this is that our original blueprint. Part of us is this advanced super being that is powerful and righteous and of the light. And the one thing that brings me back to myself, no matter how far I have strayed in my life from feeling safe and good, the one thing that brings me howling back to myself is my unbridled, protective nature over children. Like my no matter what galaxy I'm in, no matter what reality I'm in, no matter what form I take, I see the soul of a small, innocent creature, whether that be a small animal or what have you. But it's the need to protect, the unyielding desire to protect that which cannot protect itself. That's what I would take with me.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I sincerely appreciate those of you who kept an open mind while Jenny Constantine told her tale. We do live in a world where hucksters, charlatans, and wildly unfounded conspiracy theories exist, that's for sure. Many of them can be dangerous, and you should always use a great caution, logic, research various viewpoints from multiple sources before you even begin to support a global conspiracy theory. But don't forget, We also live in the very same world that calculated real conspiracies and atrocities that were confirmed on record to have been committed by the very governments that swore to protect us. In addition to that, there are highly credible witnesses, including decorated scientists, astrophysicists, and military personnel that have all told similar tales of alien species working within our governments. Regardless of all of the above, there is certainly covert manipulation at play, whether it's biased and politically motivated news, advertising, whether it's of alien origin or not. What's essentially important is to live your life, think for yourself, retain your free will at all costs, live free, and always question your government, no matter how well they speak, how compassionate they appear to be on a podium, and how many empty promises they make with a smile. So, I wish you good night, sweet dreams, and I'll leave you with this metaphorical caveat. Rest well, dream deeply and beautifully, but don't ever fall asleep.